probably depends a little bit on the deal. So it's about commercial judgment for me. You need to look at the deal that's on the table and think through the likely scenarios. Let me try and give some examples. So depending where your product or service is at, and the maturity of the offering, you'll have more experienced touch points of what things might be a problem or what things are definitely not going to be a problem. So right. If you've implemented a product or implemented a service, a couple of thousand times, you probably know where the pinch points are. So is it that the implementation period that the customer is looking for is quite tight on timescales, or is it quite comfortable and you think you're going to get there? In which case, things like liquidated damages or delay payments, if it's comfortable, that's not going to be a problem for you. You're probably not going to worry too much about that. Whereas if it's at the pinch point, you're probably going to be thinking, hang about, this might not go well, or it might be a bit tight for time, so I need to think about that. On the flip side of that, if your product is a new product or is a new service offering, you haven't got experience points, so your risk is much higher. So you're having to think about, well, if I do this in a rush, am I going to get caught with a bit of a cold here, and we're going to end up with a bit of a problem, either something in dispute, something that's not going to go well, and balance that against, it might be your first time to market and you want to conclude your first deal because you want to get your product out there and you want to get that reference point. So that's where commercial judgment really comes in. And I think it's about those scenarios. Is there a chance you're going to be late? Is there a chance that you're not going to be able to meet the service levels? If it's your service level, you're probably fairly comfortable because you've probably baked some contingency into it and there's some comfort room in there. Obviously, on the contractuals, you're going to look to what's the absolutes. Where's your limit of liability? Is there a limit of liability? If there's not a limit of liability, you've got unlimited risk. That doesn't feel like a great position to be in. So, what's the payment terms look like? Are you going to be waiting for your money? Is there any acceptance criteria that's going to make it difficult? Is it clear how you get your money? What is the criteria for payment? How long does it take to get your money? Those sorts of general things are there, but assuming all of those are from a very quick skim look within your normal parameters, then it comes down to the risk of delivery. That's where you get to, and that probably depends on the deal a little bit.
Right. Okay. So the frustrating reality is the more innovative you're being, the more ground you're breaking, the more risk there is, and the more unknowns there are.
Yeah. Certainly in the IT industry, and other industries, we talk about, is it leading edge or is it bleeding edge? And bleeding edge is not a comfortable place to be. If you're the first to market with a technology or a certain offering, you're the guinea pig. And being a guinea pig never feels that comfortable. Somebody has to be first. There are benefits to being first, but there can be pain points to being first. So it's about how well have you tested it? How well has it gone? That sort of thing. So I think, but it comes back to me to commercial judgment, and it's not a formulaic answer. It's about the ability to think through the different scenarios and think, right. So if everything goes well, nobody's going to worry about this. But what are the things that might not go well, and can I mitigate them somehow, such that I can get to an acceptable answer at speed? Because that was the question. Is it at speed? So how quickly can you do that? How quickly can you analyze, work out what the risk potential is, and then, if need be, mitigate, offer an alternative that isn't just no, because no doesn't work. We know that, or it invariably takes longer to conclude the deal, which goes against the speed bit. So it's, how do I mitigate and give either the customer, the supplier, that alternative that allows them to still get what they want, but allow it to conclude the deal. Another great question. So for me, it comes down to materiality. And I guess, what do I mean by that? It's the materiality of the deal in terms of the sizes of them, but size can be misleading. Also the risk, that be that contractual risk, delivery risk, financial risk, so how do we look at the materiality of it? How do we look at, if something happens with those risks, do we back ourselves to fix the problem? So if you're going to get less than 1% risk of something happening, and you think whatever it is, you're going to be able to fix it without, shall we say, bankrupting the company or causing a massive issue that derails your growth strategy, because that's the important bit, then that might become acceptable. So how can you put process and rules, and I'm not a process and rules type person, but how can you put process and rules around that materiality? How can you give the business a framework in which to operate where you kind of trust people, and trust is an important part of this, because if you've provided framework and rules, you trust them that they're abiding by it.
Yeah.
Sometimes that doesn't happen, but that's a different issue. Then that's a trust issue in your own business. So if you've applied that process and rules, that framework in that, and given people the parameters to work in, then you can control the materiality of the deals that you need to look at and spend your time evaluating, because they'll be either higher risk or a higher proportion of your revenues, and therefore that's where you want to spend your time. That's where it's more material to your business, and presumably that's where it's going to make the biggest impact and help the business grow, so at speed. And if you can do that, and that's difficult, so let's be clear, you don't start off a high growth company. You start off as a small business and you start to grow. And the growth curve is not linear, and it doesn't grow exponentially forever. It grows for a period of time, and then it'll flatten, and then it grows for a period of time. But when you're in that exponential growth period, it's difficult to suddenly go, I'm going to stop doing what I've been doing and create a set of process and rules, or I'm going to take my process and rules and alter them because the business has altered, because you've got somebody screaming to your left and right going, I need you to do these things, and you're going, just hang on a minute, I need to write a process. That doesn't really work. So it's about, how do you find that time to kind of go, I can see this coming, I need to predict it happens before it happens, because once I'm there, I won't be able to use that process and rules. So how can I set some process and rules that aren't so tight, that allow the business to do their thing, what they're good at, because they are good at it, because you're growing. If you're a high growth business, you are a good business, you're growing. So put some parameters that allow them to do what they do, but with some governance around it that allows you to think there's not going to be a huge problem here. I think I'd start by saying finance becomes important in that as well. So finance as a function, if you kind of, and not all businesses have a legal function, not all businesses have a commercial function, but clearly we're talking to the commercial community, so hopefully that they do, or they're thinking about getting one. So, but most businesses have some form of finance function. And most businesses have a sales function. It might not be called a sales function, depending on the size of the business. But people who represent those, like you say, stakeholder functions. So, and I think for me, it's about making sure that the business is clear on the ask. What is the ask of those teams? So typically what we're talking about here is a deal. So the deal, it's on the table. What is the ask of it? Why is it different to what we normally do, and we do time after time after time, and therefore it's different? So what's that ask? And then those functions presumably will look at it and kind of go, either that's something that frankly isn't within my bailiwick, shall we say? What's the, so, if it's not a legal issue, then legal probably aren't that interested, frankly. They'll be interested that the business can do the deal, but, but what's the ask? What's the consequences of considering this? And then you move on to, well, if we're going to do this, how do we do it? Are there some other parameters that need to shift a little, shall we say? Because how do you turn something that is outside your norm into something that you kind of go, well, this increases the risk in this area, it increases a delivery risk, or it increases a financial risk, or it increases cash flow risks, which is quite common. How do we mitigate that such that we get comfortable that whilst it's still a risk, it's a risk that we can accept? And I think part of it is, once you're clear on what the ask is, how do you get the stakeholders, and that doesn't mean the whole company, on a short call? You need the decision makers who are able to make the decision on that on a short call, and then agree the parameters that make it acceptable on the call, and delegate the right person, be that the salesperson or a commercial person, or if it's a legal issue, a legal person, to take those parameters, execute them, and allow you to move forward.
And is it the case then, a good commercial person here is the person who's perhaps invested in each one of those different areas in a way that the lawyer perhaps, that their core focus is risk mitigation, the finance person is making sure that the payment terms stack up and fit in with their operational needs, and the salesperson wants the deal done? Are you kind of just, you've got that investment in all of those? And
I mean, rightly or wrongly, I've always thought of commercial being that glue, shall we say, that understands a bit about delivery, isn't a delivery expert, isn't delivery or ops, shall we say, but understands about finance, but isn't an accountant or a finance expert, understands the contract, but isn't a lawyer. So if you're getting into real deep legal bits, we'll probably need some help with that. Isn't sales, but is invested in selling. And I think that's what good commercial people do, and they are the glue. And that's why sometimes in smaller businesses, commercial doesn't exist immediately, because it's just seen as, well, we need a salesperson, typically small businesses don't have legal either, so they'll have a salesperson, they'll have a delivery person, and they'll have a finance person. And then it's about, well, as you grow, are you growing and are you accepting more different natures of deals? And that could be the construct of the deal, or it could be the construct of the contract. How do we make sure that those things that we're accepting are deliverable, are optimal for us in terms of finances, and don't allow the CEO, the MD, to have sleepless nights every night for the next X weeks until the thing is delivered and he's collected his cash. So it's about making that, and also about making it sustainable. So can we construct deals? When I talk about constructing deals, I mean the finances of it, the contract, the delivery plan. Can we construct something that is sustainable for us and our customers? Because that's the only way you get repeatable high growth business. Because if it's not sustainable, if you can't deliver it, customers will stop buying it. If it's not delivered in a timescale that allows the customer to get the benefits that they want from it, they'll stop buying it. If it's priced too high, they'll stop buying it. But if it's priced too low, it's not sustainable for you. You don't make enough money out of it to pay your bills, the cash flow, etc. If you can't deliver it, it'll suck more delivery time, so your overheads are going to go up. Again, it's not profitable, sustainable. So it's about constructing that thing in the envelope that says this is within the envelope, that makes it sustainable for us to do this repeatable times, and therefore we can make money and customers can receive a product or a service that gives them that latter end mark. So unlimited liability, time is of the essence, things like that you kind of go, oh, hang about, my spidey senses are tingling and I'm worried.
You're losing control, complete control by accepting things like that.
That doesn't necessarily mean that they're always a no. You can find ways around them, and so I've done deals where we've had to find ways around things like that. And that's why I come back to what we mentioned at the start, commercial judgment. If this was kind of a formula, then you just plug it into your spreadsheet or the computer and out will pop the answer. Sometimes it's about judgment. It's about things in combination. And there's, it's not just 2 or 3 things in combination. If you looked at a contract that enshrines a deal, you're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of different things in combination.
Yeah.
And therefore you end up with millions of permutations, if not unlimited permutations. So that's why judgment comes into it. It's not something that necessarily you can just write a formula for. I mean, a formula would cover, or potentially could cover, 80-90%, which is why process and rules work to a degree for 80-90%. But then your judgment comes in when you get those red flags, as they're often called. And to me, a red flag is a warning sign. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a no. Sometimes it can be a no, and I think businesses need to be clear that there are walkaway points. There are deals that you just, frankly, you should walk away from. It's not something that's deliverable. It's not that the risk and reward are commensurate. That's people talk about risk and reward. Let's be clear, if you're a supplier, the reward is your profit. That's what money you're going to make out of it. That's the reward. It's not the revenue. The revenue looks good. It's the big number. And but the profit, what you actually make out of it, is what makes it sustainable. That's your reward. And you have to balance that against the risk. If you don't deliver successfully, what's the risk? Now, when I look at that and I do it repeatable multiple times, does that risk and reward equation look good to me? Does that mean I'm still going to be in business in a year's time or 2 years' time or whatever it is? So you have to look at that. And those red flags are things that proportionally shift that risk equation. So is the reward still a good reward? Have I got enough other business that I think, actually, why would I take this on? I've got 10 other deals that I can do that doesn't have this problem. And therefore, maybe I say to the customer, well, sorry, this is not the one for us.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's a good conversation sometimes. Customers come back to you and go, why?
Yeah.
In a world where sometimes tenders are, done electronically, and you send something into an ether of a black hole of an email box, and then they say, well, if you don't accept this, you can't win, you can't be the supplier. Sometimes writing to the customer and saying, well, then we're out, but if you want to change your mind on these things, then I've found customers, not all the time, but sometimes come back to you. So I think it's about looking at those things. So I never say there's anything that is always not acceptable, but there's always warning signs, shall we say. And then there's clearly other things where, frankly, you can be more malleable on it. You can move other things. So, if you talk about milestone payments and things like that, fine. It depends on your cash flow position. It depends on the acceptance criteria. If the acceptance criteria is a walk in the park, then it's a cash flow thing. Now, cash flow for a small business is important. For a bigger business, maybe less so. There are some black and whites. If they ask for an insurance cover, have you got the insurance cover? No, you haven't. Well, you can go and buy it. No, that's got a cost. So what's, does the deal sustain that? Do you think other customers are going to want that? You make a business decision at that point as to whether you increase your insurance. So it really, I know it comes down to, it depends, but there are things that are red flags. But for me, the red flags are warning. Can you take that warning and do something with it, and kind of then create something that allows it to become acceptable? And if not, don't be afraid to walk away.
The power of no. It's
you get a contract, and let's say you're at the point where you've got a commercial team, you've got a contract, and one of your commercial people are looking at that. You need a way that they can summarize that, because if they can't, and they're just going to either regurgitate the contract or give you the contract to read, frankly, there's no point in having them, because you're doing it yourself. I know that sounds awful, but that's the reality of it. So you need a way of summarizing that. So you need a form or a template to be able to do that. Comes back to those process and rules and that multi-layered approach. But I think the key thing for me is, if you've got other people who are performing a commercial role, shall we say, that doesn't necessarily mean they are a commercial person. They could be a salesperson who are doing it. Do you trust them? Comes back to that trust. And then, have you given them the right delegated responsibilities to do the business? Because if you're a commercial leader, you can't become a point that basically blocks business. You can't become, as often people have said about commercial business prevention, you can't be that to be successful. You have to be somebody who enables business. And if you're becoming a blocker, then you've got a problem. You need to fix that blocker, whether it's processes and rules and tools, whatever. But you need to free up your time to enable you to make the right decisions for the business, to enable business to happen. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and that in this conversation, that comes across time and time again, that your time, the commercial team's time, is finite. Even if we plug in AI and all sorts of things, it's about getting you focused where you need to be focused. There's a whole bunch of stuff the business can do. I think you once said to me that at one of the companies you've worked for, if it's under 50K, it just goes through.
No, absolutely. And that's part of that materiality that we talked about before. So if it's within a certain tolerance, you kind of go, look, yes, there could be a big problem in that somebody hasn't looked at it, but if you think 99% of those sub 50K, to use that example, deals are fine, and experience tells you that because you've been doing it for a little while, then frankly, the 1% chance, you just back yourself to fix it.
Yes.
Sometimes it's better to take the risk and back yourself to fix the problem. Now, clearly, if you're trying to fix an enormous problem on an enormous deal, that becomes more challenging. And maybe not impossible, but maybe that's too much for you to kind of back. It's about your own sort of risk reward model, if you like. What's my value add? Do I think I can fix that problem? If I can fix that problem and it's going to occur once every blue moon, then let's just move on. Let's just deal with it. Because as I'm sure lots of people say, when everything goes smoothly in a deal, when delivery happens and payment gets made,